That same meeting that most of these decisions are taken, wherein they now break themselves into baits and commissions and go on and execute them.
No, so what I'm saying is that, for instance, any one of us, we shouldn't be here debating this issue because any one of us should be able to go to the ministry and say, look, what are your priorities and your plans for the next, 5 years? Because any serious business or organization should have a plan for at least, a 5-year period. You see, listen, when you listen carefully to other governments, when they speak, people speak, about projects that are scheduled to commence even after their tenure of office. You never hear that here. You will never hear Governor Fashola telling you that a particular project is meant to start, during the tenure of his successor. That is not done. Because, the government...
That's what you want to be done?
That is what should be done. Governments are, government is a continuum.
Yes, but
Yes.
And they being realistic when they say, listen, let me do what I can do now, rather than focus on what the next person will do, because the next person will definitely have his plans. You shouldn't plan for the next person, and you know how it works here. Another government comes in, he starts all over again. So what's wrong with planning?
That is a critically wrong perspective to hold of government. And that's why we're in a mess, quite frankly. Because, that's what I said earlier. Governments are about the man who is in the office. Why should Governor Fashola, for example, or President Jonathan be planning for President Jonathan? He should be planning for Nigeria. And if he's planning for Nigeria, that plan should have a span that may, exceed his own tenure.
So does it mean
Yes.
that if there's a light rail project going on now,
Yes.
and it doesn't get completed in his tenure,
Yes.
it definitely will continue for the next tenure?
It may continue. Because the next governor may pull the plug. Or the next president may pull the plug.
Even if they've got 80% completed job?
Listen, we have a lot of projects that are 90% to completion, but are never commissioned in this country. Go ahead, look around.
So in other words, there's the planning you talked about.
Yes.
That means when the new man comes on board, he stops what the predecessors just started, and he starts a new one and leaves it uncompleted for another individual to come in and another uncompleted project. Is that what it is?
In many cases, you find a lot of that. That's my point. You find a lot of that.
So why should they now plan if that is going to be the case?
No, you see, we're talking about a culture that has become so, I think that has become the norm, okay? This culture of, I call it the culture of tentativeness, because, people take a very tentative approach. Because if you're smart and you recognize that money has been allocated to a particular project, now you come into office as the president, and maybe you are judged that the people in that district didn't vote for you, okay? So the contractor needs maybe the remainder of the 30% to finish that project. But because you have some political reason to be not liking the people who are in that district, you decide to withhold that money to punish them for their lack of electoral
Is that usually
support.
the case?
It does happen every day. It happens all the time. My point is that if that governor or that president or that local government chairman understood that there was some political cost to not doing that, that there was some understanding that a plan of government, an investment of public resources in a project must be followed through, then that governor will hesitate, will think twice before making such a decision to pull the plug on a project in which so much has been invested of the public funds.
Isn't that an indictment on members of society, even groups like yours? Because when these kind of things happen, you should stand up and say, no, you can actually dissolve. Why is this project not continuing? And if the reasons are not sufficient, you continue focusing on that.
No, you're absolutely right. Which is why, in my perspective, reading of Nigeria's governance situation, I find that our problem is not so much a failure of leadership, but a failure of followership. It's really about us, the citizens, because we are the people of Nigeria. We're the people for whom the laws and the constitution and the government is meant. And so when we are not vigorous enough, when we are not vigilant enough, when we are so absent from our own country and we have ceded the public space to those who have been given what is ordinarily just an agency, a mandate to lead or to govern or to perform certain tasks over a period of time, then we should hold ourselves responsible. Because if we all leave the studio here and left all of this very expensive equipment, just let the gates open. Look, it won't take a professional thief to come and remove these things. Even a drunk who is walking the streets will strolling and remove them. When we come back, we will look like, oh, some thieves invaded. Maybe we even begin to praise God that we're not here when they came. It's not about that. Ministers, governors, officers of government sometimes don't do the things they're supposed to do because, nobody's really asking questions. Nobody really appears to care. And it's also not true that people are not complaining. I mean, I resigned from the board of the LMDGP, the World Bank project, over the demolition of Makoko, when the Lagos State government, after I had used every means to say, look, you know what, this is a contradiction. You took $200 million from the World Bank to improve 9 slums, including the Makoko community. And then you proceed to demolish the community without, due process of law. I said, you know what, I can't continue to be on this board because it's a contradiction. The whole purpose of the project was to uplift the conditions of these people, yet you use the money that you have received in their name from the World Bank to fund their homelessness and their misery. I said, look, I couldn't be, I resigned in July when this occurred, before I led the effort to stop the demolition.
That's just Makoko. Now, perhaps we should also talk about some other issues that have actually happened quite lately in Abuja, for instance. These are the Mararaba estate and things of that nature in so many other places, in an attempt for the government to bring a real artist program of development for the people. Some of those slums or areas have been touched. And for Sarak, what do you think the government hasn't been able to do rightly, and have the people individually breached any kind of law, getting shelter for themselves in this case?
Well, first of all, let's begin with the government. I think that the government, yes, unfortunately, don't mean to come across as being negative or pessimistic of our government. But I think that the truth of the matter is that the government has failed to think and worry about how to accommodate this population. And that's also what I was talking about earlier about planning, because your population grows at a particular proportion, and you are not, I think, taking the steps to think through systems that will accommodate this population. That is what governments worry about every day. Ministers for national planning, for other departments in other countries spend sleepless nights worrying about, next year we're going to have this addition to our population. How are we actually going to cope with infrastructure? They think about it. They plan it. It's not an activity. Here, everything is an activity. Housing is an activity. The government wakes up and they want to, do something. They, declare one estate, we're going to construct 500 houses, without thinking about how you transfer those houses to those who need the houses. Ultimately, a lot of the government's involvement in the housing sector is, designed to build houses for the top 1% of the population, not for those who work in China's television, not for those who work in the civil service even. They're not meant for them. And there's nowhere in this country where you find a 2-3 bedroom apartment that goes for anything less than, if you're lucky, 3.5 million naira. In many cases, on the average, it's about 5 to 7 million, even when constructed by the government or in collaboration with a private agency. My point is that the government has not given Nigerians, any sort of lead in how to, I think, do something that other people do for themselves, which is either build or buy, because it's not the government's job to build houses for everybody. Okay, but the government's role is to, orchestrate a system that allows me as a citizen to access housing. That's the bottom line.
Okay, but there must be somewhere or some scenario where we either have gotten it right or we're almost getting it right.
Yes.
Where could that be?
The scenario is that, first of all, that we begin to, I think, really take the 2 words we bandy around all the time, transparency, accountability, begin to take them seriously. Take them seriously, not because there's a big police gun chasing after you, like the EFCC, but because we understand the linkages between accountability, probity, and human and physical development. If we understand that, then maybe people who in government will begin to see the need to, I think, just do more.
Yeah, but is there no case in this country
yes,
that we're getting it right in terms of developing infrastructure?
No, we're getting everything right and getting everything wrong. Okay, it's not about, there's no, but you can't isolate a case where you've gotten it. I don't know of that sort of case. If you do, maybe you will educate me about it. But I think that we're getting everything right and we're getting it wrong, because the fact that the governments are still building roads, they're still building hospitals, and still building schools, like the hospital in my village back in Delta, that is huge, it's humongous. But you get there, there's no human being there. There's no doctor, there are no nurses. But massive building in a village of maybe less than 200,000 people. Personally, I don't see the reason for such a huge project. And the project was built because somebody in the system who came from that part, made that happen.
Probably responding to the cries of the people.
But you know what? The people were crying for access to healthcare. They were not asking for a building to be named, hospital. without doctors, without medicines, and without nurses.
But they have to start from somewhere. Don't
You don't start from a massive building. You start from, efficient delivery of services.